Hey everyone, welcome to the exciting world of memory. That's what we're going to be discussing today. I gotta say, I think this is one of my very favorite topics. Memory is such a complex thing that we all work with, utilize, rely on, are failed by every day of our lives, right? But there's not a lot that we concretely know about it. There are definitely some things we suspect, we do have some good research about it, but there are also a lot of question marks left in memory. So if any of you are interested in doing some groundbreaking research or looking for a field where they can really make their mark, memory is going to be a good field to go into because there's still new things about memory being discovered every day. Okay, so we're going to jump into memory. I will say that there are a lot of links in this segment to different little videos I want you to watch about memory. Most of the videos are about 3 minutes long, and I'll cut and paste all of the links into an announcement, but they will also be available. You'll be able to see them on the PowerPoint as well. Okay, so we've got 3 stages of memory that the textbook talks about. The first one is sensory memory, right? So sensory meaning our senses, right? The memory that we have from just what our senses have to take it in. So we've got iconic and echoic. Iconic, less than 1 second, generally. Echoic, 4 to 5 seconds, again, generally. Again, iconic, what we see. Echoic, what we hear. And then we have short-term memory. This is generally, again, less than 30 seconds is what we're looking for. This is oftentimes called workbench memory. This is where a lot of our decisions, our active thinking, our active remembering, our active recollecting, our active maybe decision analysis, this is where this takes place. And then, of course, we have long-term memory. Now, long-term memory, there's really no limit on how long-term memory can be. Some of us have memories easily that are 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years old, depending on how old we are, right? Okay. So those are, generally speaking, the 3 stages of memory that we just discussed. We're going to discuss a couple of different types of non-normal memory. So these are things that not every individual experiences. In fact, most individuals don't experience it. Okay, so the first one is retrograde amnesia. There's a little video clip that goes along with this. It's a very nice little video describing somebody who's had this case. It's only, again, about 30 minutes. All of these are pretty short. Retrograde amnesia means you have forgotten the past, right? So you got a little arrow pointing backwards. You have forgotten something that's happened to you. You remember that everything that's happened since your accident, you remember just fine, but man, you really don't remember much before your accident. You can't really remember meeting your wife. You can't really remember learning to drive. You can't remember those things. That would be retrograde amnesia. Anterograde amnesia means you can't make new memories. So you still remember the past, you still remember maybe what happened to you before the accident or the injury, the operation, whatever it was that happened. You still remember what happened to you before, but you're not able to form new memories. So maybe the injury, the accident, whatever it was, happened 10 years ago. You remember everything that happened up until shortly before that day. But those last 10 years, you haven't formed any new memories, and you don't really have any idea what's happened to you since that happened. So this one has 2, and then there's also a tracing exercise, which I think you guys will really like, which shows that there's different parts of memory that we have. We can remember having done something, like our body can remember it and get better at doing something, even though we consciously have no memory of having ever done it before. So again, good little clips that back up those and explain those. I would highly recommend you watching these before the next quiz. And then we have something called hyperthymesia. Now, hyperthymesia is extremely rare. Most people don't talk about it. A lot of people don't even know what it is because it is so rare. Hyperthymesia is superior biographical recall, which means that people who have hyperthymesia, they have an amazing ability to recall every day, almost every single moment of their lives. You could give them a random date. You could say, June 1st, 1972, and they will tell you what they were wearing, what they did, what they ate, what music they listened to on the radio, what TV show they watched, what book they were reading, who they talked to that day. They will remember it all. That's hyperthymesia. So again, it's important to remember this is not the same as eidetic memory, right? Where you remember everything. Sometimes called photographic memory. That's not what this is. This is biographical, superior biographical recall. And again, here's a little clip about somebody who has that, and she kind of goes through it. Very, very interesting. Okay. So some recall effects, because once we encode something, once we have a memory and it gets encoded into our long-term memory, well, eventually if you ever want to have access to it ever again, we need to recall it, right? So here are some recall effects. Something called the primacy effect. The primacy effect means we're gonna more likely remember the first thing in a list, a talk, a lecture, a movie, whatever. We're gonna most likely remember the first thing more likely than we are to remember the things in the middle. So again, this doesn't mean that we will absolutely remember the first thing and we won't remember the stuff in the middle. It doesn't mean that. What it means is that there's going to be superior recall of the first things. So there's just going to be a greater percentage of those because our brains are new and being exposed to it. We're more likely to remember it. And then, of course, there's the recency effect, which is kind of the other side of that. This means we're more likely to remember the last thing, right? In a movie, in a list, in a lecture, whatever. So we're more likely to remember the first things, we're more likely to remember the last things that we heard. It's the stuff in the middle that can often become difficult and hard to remember. This is one of the reasons that if you've taken a writing class and they tell you, put your big punch, put your thesis, put the big thing that you really want to get across to your audience in the first, and then put it again, sum it up, put it again at the end, right? And that's one of the things they're really banking on here, is the stuff that you wrote in the middle, that's going to be stuff that people are not going to remember as well. The stuff they're really going to remember is the stuff you put first and the stuff you put last. So again, we can sometimes see this like something as simple as a grocery list. Let's say you write a grocery list of 15 items. Your chances of remembering like the first 2 items and the last 2 items are higher than your chance of remembering the middle 2 items. Okay, encoding. So yeah, remember, so encoding, right, that's how something gets to be from short term into long term when we encode it. These are some different ways or different thoughts about encoding. So there's maintenance rehearsal. So that's just repetitive, repetitively saying the information. So this is something that people do a lot before a quiz, maybe when they're cramming, right? This is maintenance rehearsal. I'm just going to say it over and 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 over again. And all I need to do is remember for 45 minutes to take this test and then I forget it. Maintenance rehearsal can definitely work in the short term. It's not going to be a great way, generally speaking, to encode things to be easily accessible to you if you're really looking for a long period of time to have access to that. Unless you repeatedly do the maintenance rehearsal. If you do the maintenance rehearsal of the same facts every day, well then that certainly will help get it into your long-term memory very nicely. Elaborative rehearsal. So this is rehearsal in short-term memory in which incoming information is related to information from long-term memory to encode it into long-term memory. So this is when we take something new that we just learned and we relate it to something that we already really remember in order to remember the new thing. So for instance, maybe when you were 9, your dad got a new Mercury car, and it was blue. And so when you're older, your friend is driving a Saturn and it's blue. And so what you encode is, oh, well, they're both planets, oh, they're both, both planets and they're both blue. So I'm going to remember that my friend's new car is blue because it's a planet too, just like my dad's planet car was blue, right? That's obviously a very simple example of it, but taking something new you're trying to remember and placing it, linking it to something that you already know, you already solidly have in your long-term memory. Self-reference effect. So this is when you relate information to yourself. We tend to remember things better when they're related to us somehow. So again, if we've learned that, maybe we learned a new theory about learning, and that we tend to take a test better if we study for that test in the same environment in which we're going to take for the test later. And we think to ourselves, that totally happened to me. I studied for the SATs in this really hard, uncomfortable, cold chair, and the room was really cold, and it was not fun. But when I took the test, I was also in a chair that was really uncomfortable, and the room was cold. And I think it helped me remember the stuff that was on the SATs. And so relating that new bit of information about learning to an experience that you had is going to help you remember that fact about learning. State-dependent memory. The physiological state at the time of encoding and retrieval is the same. So again, this means, let's say your heart rate is really elevated, you're sweating, you're really active, and when you're in that state, you encode a certain memory. Maybe you encode a memory about a friend of yours being mean to you. Well, next time you go for a run and you're back in that state, it's going to make it a little bit easier for you to trigger or recall that piece of information. You may not have been able to recall it as easily when you were calm and cool and collected, but now that you're kind of back in this heart accelerated, sweating, physical state, now you've got a connection physiologically, and so now you're going to have more ready access to that memory. This is very similar to mood-dependent memory, except mood-dependent memory goes by feelings, not necessarily physiological state. Now, of course, those of you are going to say physiological state and feelings are very closely tied. That is completely correct. You are absolutely right. So mood-dependent theory, when we think about it, one of the ways in which we can specifically apply it is this is one of the reasons, like maybe when you're fighting with somebody, you all of a sudden can remember all these other times that you were mad at them. Well, because you're in the same mood that you were when you encoded all those other times that you were mad. So it may not be actually that they're as horrible of a person as you think they are. It's just that whenever you're mad at them, the memories you have most ready access to are other memories when you were mad at them, right? And it's going to be the other way too. When you're really happy about them and really loving them and joyful, you're going to have more ready access to other times that you were happy and joyful and glad. And then there's mood congruent memory. And this has a tendency to retrieve experiences and information that are congruent with a person's present state. So again, you come in kind of talking about the physiological and feeling state, how they're very similar. You come in from that run, and so you're pumped up and your blood is moving and everything. And maybe you actually don't feel very good. You didn't get the endorphins. You're just agitated. Your run was extremely frustrating. Well, that might mean you're in a mood of frustration, but yet you're also still very active, right? And your heart's pumping, your system's going, your adrenaline's going. And so you're going to have the tendency to think of things that are congruent with how you're feeling right now. So you walk in, you're feeling frustrated from your run, and the trash isn't taken out. And you go, oh, the trash is never taken out. I remember all these times when the trash hasn't been taken out. And again, it's because you're in a state right now that you're going to choose memories. Your brain's automatically going to go to memories that are congruent with the state you were in. Okay, so there are several different encoding methods. I'm sure you guys have all heard of a lot of these. These are some of the biggest ones, the most popular ones. You've got mnemonic, and mnemonic simply means a memory aid. That's all it means. A lot of you know, like my very excellent mother just served us nachos, right, to remember the planet, things like that. Of course, when I learned this, there's another letter over here. You can also memorize by story making. I encourage you to watch this link. Again, it's about 2 minutes, but it really it explains this very nicely. And then there's the method of loci, memory palace. So, which again, there's another link that explains it nicely, and they're both very short. So memorizing by story making is basically just putting bits of information that you want to remember into a larger constellation of information, so that they're not just random bits, but you're now putting them together in a way that works. It makes sense. There's a pattern. So when you remember the first part of the story, you're going to remember the second part of the story, and you're going to remember the third part of the story. And so again, instead of just random facts, you're kind of putting them together so they all make sense, and one of them will logically follow the next and remind you of all the different facts. The method of loci, in this example, it's a memory palace. That is utilizing an environment that you know very well, that you can walk around inside of your mind, and putting in bits of information in them in very visible ways in your imagination, such that when you walk around that environment, you then find and locate those pieces of advice. Those pieces of facts. Okay. Retrieval, right? So we've got encoding, we've got recall, we've got retrieval. So recall, right, is when, recall is what we discussed earlier. Recall is when you're actually needing to reproduce the information. You don't have a lot of cues. You need to reproduce the information. This is one of the reasons that a lot of students love multiple choice. Multiple choice has actually not been used very long in academia. It's actually fairly new because it's not a great tool of assessing how much somebody truly knows, because they don't have to recall information. They just have to recognize it. When given a choice of 4 answers, do they recognize which one is the correct answer? And we can all clearly see that that's not the same as actually knowing the information. So even though students love multiple choice because multiple choice is easier and it makes them think that they've learned more, I certainly always thought that multiple choice was a lot easier, a lot more fun. Multiple choice is really not very effective for demonstrating what you truly have learned. It only shows, at best, what you can recognize. So if you want to really know what you have learned, get rid of multiple choices and see if you can reproduce the answer without any cues. Did they remember my birthday, or did Facebook tell them? Because if Facebook told them, right, it wasn't recall. They didn't actually remember it. And then, of course, there's recognition, right? It requires the identification of the information in the presence of retrieval cues. This would be multiple choice, right? You see A, B, C, and D, and you go, oh, that doesn't look right, that doesn't look right, that doesn't look right. That looks most right. Of course, using Post-it notes. Example of that. Okay, now there are several different theories of forgetting, and there are different reasons to forget. Certainly there are multiple different reasons to forget, so it's not as much about which of these is right or wrong, but which of these would apply in different situations. And of course, there's others as well. So encoding failure theory. So this just means it never actually got encoded correctly into long-term memory in the first place. Right? There was just a mechanism that failed in encoding it in the first place. So a lot of times when I think of memory, I think of like a big room of filing cabinets. So this would just mean the file never actually made it into the filing cabinet. Right? You thought you were putting it there, but it actually dropped in the wastebasket or something. Right? So it never actually made it into the filing system in the first place. This would be storage decay theory, meaning something happened to it. It did make it into the filing cabinet, yeah, but something happened to it once it got there. So maybe like maybe some water damage, some mildew got to it, and so next time you go to get it, you can't find it because there was decay. Right? So it did make it into storage, but then something happened to it once it was in storage, and now it's no longer accessible. Interference theory means that there's something, well, a couple of options here, but there's something that's getting in the way of you being able to get to it. So this could be like a lock in the filing cabinet metaphor. Okay, so there's proactive interference, which means something that you knew before is impacting something that you're trying to learn now. And then there's retroactive interference, which means something that you are learning now is actually getting in the way of something that you're trying to remember in the past. Okay, then there's also cue-dependent theory, which means that you need a cue to remember it. And so it's not that you've forgotten it, it's just that cue hasn't happened in order for you to remember it. We see this a lot with trauma survivors. A lot of times they'll think that they don't remember something, they'll have blank spots, and then a cue will happen, something will happen, and they'll remember it very vividly, they'll remember. Because it wasn't that they had forgotten, it's just that for one reason or another they didn't have access to it until a cue happened. Okay, so these are a couple of really cool videos that you're also going to watch for this class. They really go into explaining memory, explaining some of the intricacies of memory, some of the difficulties, some of the wonders of memory. So that's it for memory this week. There's a lot of videos to watch, so I encourage you not to wait until the last minute. I believe there's like a total of 7 videos. Most of them are pretty short, again, about 2 to 3 minutes, but I really think they help elucidate these concepts. I think they'll help you remember the concept a lot better when you watch the little videos. And again, watch all the videos before the next quiz. You will be happy.